I'm your host, Ken Dawson. And I've got a good friend of mine, Brooke Martin, brand new author, unbelievable story. She's going to be sharing a little bit about her book she just released in the past few months called Control Burn. Literally, she's an Emmy award winning newscaster. She's in the Dallas area. She is super famous. Everybody knows who she is. But she's going to share with us a little bit today about her new book, Controlled Burn, and about what it looks like in leadership. And anything that you're wanting to develop or grow can be difficult. Brooke, how you doing, my friend?
Ken, I'm so good. I'm so honored to be on with you.
Oh, it's fun today. Tell the audience. I tried to give it my best shot on who you are. Tell the audience real quick a little bit about you, who you are, and what you've got going on right now.
All right. Well, I'm going to correct you right off the bat because I'm a journalist. So I'm in the Indianapolis area.
Why did I say Dallas, Texas? Mike Mo fan.
You know why.
Was Mike.
You know why. Yeah, it was Mike. We'll blame Mike. So I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and then my career in news took me all around the country. Landed kind of as a final stint in Indianapolis. Thought I was going to be here as a news anchor for the rest of my career. Married here, had a son here, and then a life situation really took us in a totally different direction, and that was around 2018. And here we are now, out of news for about 3 years now. Now writing and speaking, and life is uncertain, but it's fun.
Walk us through a little bit about 2018 and share with the audience a little bit about your story and why the book and why have you taken that pivot in your career from being on news to being an author and a speaker?
Yeah, so 2018, our son was 2 at the time. I was the main anchor at our local news station in Indianapolis, and life was just really shiny and bright. You know, it was one of those seasons where things were great. And I found out I was pregnant with our second child. It was right on our timeline. Fingers crossed for a little girl. And we announced it, by the way, to viewers, so everyone knew I was pregnant. And then I developed a bad case of bronchitis about 14 weeks into my pregnancy, and just stopped in to my OB on my way into work to grab a Z-Pack. And the nurse practitioner asked if I wanted to sneak in and see the baby while I was there. And I was like, of course. And I was looking forward to surprising my husband with some pictures when we got home from work that night. And instead, they made a really terrible discovery, and that was that our baby had a condition called anencephaly, which is when the development is perfectly normal except their skull doesn't close at the end of development, and it is a 0% chance of survival diagnosis. And so I was alone in the ultrasound room after receiving that news, and I just remember, as tears are just flooding down my face, I remember this really, really clear whisper in my heart of Emmanuel, Emmanuel, Emmanuel. And I'll be totally honest with you, Ken, I grew up a Christian, but I was so confused why I was hearing that in the time at the time. And it wasn't until much later that I discovered the purpose behind it. I mean, yes, we know if you are a Christian, you know Emmanuel means God with us. So like I knew in essence why I was hearing it, but I didn't understand the profound impact that it would have in my life. And so we immediately decided to carry. We found out it was a girl that day as well. We named her Emma Noel after Emmanuel. And we started walking a road we never saw coming. You know, I normally tell other people's stories, and all of a sudden I'm thrust into the spotlight myself, telling our own. And for the next 6 months, I carried Emma, knowing what was coming.
You know, I don't know how much you know about my journey as well. I have 4 daughters, 28, 25, 21, and 16. Between my 28 and 25-year-old, I was in the middle of growing one of the largest youth ministries in the country. My wife was 6.5 months pregnant with twin sons, and we lost them. And so that journey was, we just went into and she worked in labor and delivery. She was a scrub tech. We went into just a regular OB doctor and had some very similar news. So I know the pain that can be for you. And then ours, because they were already there, they were already dead. Both of them were. Her body did the stuff. And so Monday, that was on Thursday afternoon. By Monday, she had delivered our boy stillborn. And so I understand the pain that goes in that for you. How did you talk to me about that journey with you and your husband? Because you carried her to term. Walk me through some of the things that you learned and some of the ways that you and your husband kind of dealt with that, because that's an unbelievable burden, if you will, to carry, and the pain to carry.
Yeah, yeah. So immediately, we got home and did our own research, and we had to because we weren't really given a ton of information at the
Mhm.
doctor's office, and so we sat on our couch. I remember, and at that point, we had varying degrees of faith, my husband and I, and we sat on our couch completely broken, and knowing that we had not anything close to what it takes to get through something like this.
Mhm.
And I remember we prayed one prayer together, and it was 3 words. And it was out of sheer desperation. And it was, God, be glorified.
Mhm.
Because we didn't know what else to pray for. It was like, we know what's coming. We know our daughter is dying. We know I'm going to carry her for the next 6 months, knowing that we're going to have to say goodbye. Like, it is the most like gut wrenching
Mhm.
reality. And so it was like in that moment, I almost feel like that prayer was given to us, but it was like, God, if you do anything, like, be glorified through this. And we had no idea how he would answer that prayer. And
Mhm.
so I would say that was the first step we took in surrendering our pain
Mhm.
and truly going about it open-handed. The next step actually happened. A photographer from the station was going to, this was about a week or so later, come to my house to take some still photos. I was going to write up a blog to announce to viewers the
Mhm.
situation, because I'm not going to lie about it for the next 6 months, right? Um, and I woke up early that morning with this distinct thought that I can't write this. My whole career, I write. I know how to craft things. I know how to make things
Mhm.
sound maybe prettier than they are, more polished than they are. And I said, just bring a video camera. And he came, and I said, please just press record. My husband and I didn't know what we were going to say.
Mhm.
And it was so raw, Ken. And we just
Mhm.
shared. And it was, that video made its way around the world.
Mhm.
And I think it's because it was like maybe the first time in my career that I chose authenticity and I
Mhm.
chose vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I decided I don't have to be the perfect, buttoned up, polished news anchor this time. I just need to be me, and I need to be real. And there is something that people gravitate towards when you allow yourself to be exposed in that way. And that really set the tone for the next 6 months of
Mhm.
me being really careful to be authentic.
Mhm.
And there were times I would record a video like for social media, and I would get done and about to post it. I'm like, nah, like,
Mhm.
I'm not that okay. I'm not that this. I'm not that this. I'm trying to make this seem different than it really is. And I would delete it. And so anyway, I didn't realize then, but it was really the beginning for me of a stripping away
Mhm.
of facade and pretense that had been built up over 15 years of being a news anchor. And it's led me now to today, where that is still what I'm leading with.
What was your hope in that? Like, I want to be authentic. You've been obviously the news and the makeup and the hair and all the stuff to look perfect. What in you was like, no, I want to do this in an authentic way. What do you think led you to that decision? And then what were you hoping for out of that
Mm.
decision?
I think what led me there is the fire, is the
Mm.
suffering. Like, there's something that happens in pain and suffering that burns away everything else. It's
Mm.
why it's so transformative,
Mm.
because it leaves us nothing else to hide behind. And so you develop different a different appetite. You all of a sudden can't rely on things that you used to rely on. And so even more than, I mean, yes, it was an intentional decision, but it was also almost survival.
Mm.
Like, this is my chance. I am stripped, emotionally naked right now. I can either try and put everything back on as quick as I can. I can try and jump out of the fire, right? Like, we could have chose to
Mhm.
end the
Mhm.
pregnancy and,
Mhm.
and jump out of the fire.
Mhm.
Like, we could have had so many different reactions But it's like, if you choose to stay in it and allow others to see you in it, it is beyond transformational. There is nothing else on earth as transformational as pain and suffering.
Mm,
But ultimately, really, it's up to us in
mhm,
how we allow it to transform us. We don't have to. And, you see that all the time. And in this book, I kind of use the analogy as fire either being a wildfire or a controlled burn. And
mm,
we see wildfires, I mean, man, is timely right now
mhm.
with everything
Yeah,
going on in California. But
yeah.
you see the devastation that can happen in pain and suffering. It's the trauma that turns into addiction, that turns into death.
Mhm,
It's the,
mhm,
you name it. Those are
mhm, mhm,
wildfires. But here I was realizing, maybe not in the moment, but
mhm.
in hindsight, looking back and saying, this, as horrible and painful as it is, this is an opportunity, and I can either take it or I can jump out, and I chose to take it. I'm so
How
glad I did.
long in that process did it take you and your husband to get to where you were maybe not necessarily at peace, but you knew, okay, God, you put us in this situation and we're gonna see this through. And then so that let me maybe even rephrase that question. How long through that suffering journey did you realize, man, this is making us better humans?
Mm,
Like this is positioning us for the rest of our life.
wow. We're still learning it. I don't think we ever got to a point where it all made sense or it all, became clear, or like we aren't hurting anymore or grieving anymore. This is going to be a lifelong, I mean, it will be a lifelong grief. I think what happened, there was a turning point though, and it was, so we delivered Emma March 19th of 2019, and she survived 21 minutes.
Mhm,
And it was a sacred time. And she was able to be in the hospital room as I recovered from a C-section for a couple days afterwards because of a cooling device
mhm,
called a cuddle cot. So
mhm,
she was literally physically able to be in our room so we could
mhm,
have family hold her, take
mhm,
pictures, that it's kind of like a
mhm,
bonding thing,
mhm,
right? And so I had been through a pregnancy, well, a diagnosis, a pregnancy, the delivery, and the death. And still the day that I dreaded most was the day of discharge, because
mhm.
I could not fathom how a mother is expected to walk out of a hospital room, out of a
Right.
hospital, and leave her baby behind. Um, it felt, Ken, like it would physically break me, like it would kill me. And so I woke up that morning, the morning of discharge, with tears already falling down my face from my
Mhm,
sleep. And I cried out to God in utter desperation. I said, I can't do this. I
mhm,
cannot do this. And in that moment, instantaneously, I've never experienced anything like it before,
mhm,
but I felt a physical strength like start in my toes and just surge through my body. I felt a weight, like of peace fall, like on top of, like it just like poof, like blanketed my fear. And I realized, oh, like this is Emmanuel. Like it's
mhm,
real. Like this God, this Jesus that I grew up, claiming to believe in, it's so real. It's more real than I ever knew. And so we ended up rocking Emma and handing her to a nurse and leaving the hospital. I remember we got in the car and we looked at each other and we smiled. And it wasn't like
mhm,
the grief was gone or anything. It was
mhm,
like
mhm,
we just realized we walked through the unimaginable. We lived out the decision a lot of said was crazy. Um, it's like we walked through fire and we weren't burned, like we didn't smell like
mhm,
smoke. It was like, whoa. And it was like this taste of what is available to us, that for all of our comfortable Christianity and
mhm,
lives kind of running with Christianity being an accent, we weren't tapping into the profound access that we have, and into the spiritual and into power and into providence and
mhm,
into, I mean, and so it really, what it did, it was spark something in me. I talk in the book about this species of flower called fire followers. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's a real species, and their seeds are only unlocked by the heat shock of fire. And so they'll lay dormant for decades, awaiting one thing. And then after a fire rolls through in the black canvas, you'll start to see these pops of color of these fire followers sprouting with incredible speed. And I believe in each of us are fire followers. They're truth and revelation that unlock somehow in suffering and grow in us with incredible ferocity and speed. And so it was like that time in the hospital room unlocked something in me and in us. And anyway, we went after it, and we just couldn't get enough. And so that's really kind of when you say, when were you maybe awakened to this reality? That's definitely one mile marker on our journey that I will always remember as being like, oh, like I've been taking a penny from heaven when the riches have been available to me the whole time.
I love that. Tell me how that, with you and your husband, walk me through what did that do with your relationship with the two of you guys?
Yeah, I mean, depends on the day. Like there were times where we would fight about, I would accuse him of not being sad enough. And, and he would kind of process internally, and we were not seeing eye to eye on grief. And it's a lot of couples end up separating, divorcing after tragedy and trauma. And I get it. Like it is hard. But ultimately, like what came from it was that in both of us surrendering individually, God worked differently, but to the same extent in both of us. And so it's like we weren't trying to just like get better by looking at each other. We were both like super focused on Jesus. And somehow, some way, by us both looking that way, he drew us closer. And so we look back now, and it sounds so crazy to say, but we're so thankful for her. We're so thankful for how God took, what the enemy meant for evil and turned it for our good. Because, we've been transformed, we've been changed, and we're not going back.
When Joshua and Caleb were delivered on a Monday morning, and they had what was called twin-to-twin transfusion, which one was about 9 or 10 inches long and one was about 6 inches long. And so Dr. Cox and Dr. Little, both of the OB doctors, both came in that morning. Several of the nurses, friends of Christy, because she worked in labor and delivery, were there. And I'll never forget when they handed us our boys. God said, honor me. And so I held them and I just lifted them up and I said, God, I said, I thank you that your word says in John 10:10 that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but you've come to give us life and give it to us more abundantly. God, I have no idea why this happened. You're not the author of death. You are the author of life. God, let no one say that God needed 2 angels in heaven, because God, this isn't you. And God, I honor you for doing this. And then for me and my journey in that, about 6 months later, I was getting ready for my first National Youth Leadership Conference. I was building one of the largest youth ministries in the country at the time, which was hard because I'm like, God, I'm doing this for you. And then this happened, just the human side of that journey, And then one morning I was in my auditorium praying for our conference, and I've only had one vision my entire life. And this was this one. And it was like in my prayer time, God peeled back heaven, and I literally saw Jesus sitting on his throne. Wow. And he had one of my sons on each knee, and they were about 5 to 6 years old. And I saw him, and it was when I knew, okay, I'm going to get to see them again.
Yes.
Talk to me about, for you and your husband, and maybe even in your child now, sharing with them, hey, listen, this is just a brief separation. Walk me through your faith journey in that.
Yeah. So we had a rainbow baby, Marlo, afterwards. And so she is 4 now. And Max.
So did we the very next year.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And and I say, I don't call her, that's not redemption, right? Like redemption isn't replacing what's lost. It sure is a beautiful gift, but redemption is knowing him.
Mhm.
Like that's the redemption in what is taken from us, is knowing him. And so we celebrate Emma's birthday every year. Ken, like you, the reality of heaven, the reality of eternity is so much more real to me. Um, the reality of the great cloud of witnesses and the saints who are, active. I mean, everything that is going on in a spiritual. I mean, I've just been opened and awakened to all of it, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna melt us. Like it is gonna melt us. Similarly, I had a vision, a picture of Emma not long ago. She was about 5, and the thing that struck me was Jesus said with a smirk on his face, "There's someone who's excited to see you."
Mm.
And she looked at me. This will be the first time I can get through this without crying if I can. She looked at me and she goes, and her face lights up and she goes, "Mama!" And she runs to me and she clinged onto my leg. But here's the beautiful thing about it, Ken. The way she exclaimed "Mama" had no ounce of
Right.
missing or sadness. It was like exactly like when I go to the grocery store and I come back and I walk in the door and the kids are like, "Mom!" Like there was no sadness.
Yeah.
And I just was like you, I was like, our kids are okay. Like they're okay. They're being so taken care of. And one day that reality is going to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just a whole other side of it. My awakening to the spiritual and to heaven. It's just been beautiful.
I love Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. You said earlier, you're like, now we're grateful that we walked through that season.
Yeah.
Somebody who's listening to this podcast today goes, how in the world can you be grateful? Can you put that into words?
Yeah, I think, we live in a country blessed to have Christian foundations, and a lot of us have grown up as Christians. But the blessing can also be a curse in that truth can become stale in our minds and in our hearts. And I call it a gospel blockage, where it's like we believe things up here, but it doesn't get here. And pain and suffering is the antidote and the remedy to a gospel blockage. And I realized that I had been living most of my life just kind of using Christianity instead of surrendering and dying with Jesus, as the gospel tells us. And so when I say I'm grateful, I realize that without that, I don't think I ever would have gotten here. Without the fire to burn away everything that was holding me back from the presence of God, I don't think I would have myself intentionally surrendered anything that was required to get there. And so, it's why, I mean, the Bible over and over talks about rejoicing in suffering. And I don't know about you, but there were times I would read that and be like, yeah, that's for them, not for, like, who's going to rejoice in
Of course,
suffering?
that's a natural human response.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you can't fathom rejoicing in suffering. It doesn't make sense until you are led through the fire and come out on the other side and understand what has been burned away and what is now growing. And, we have this epidemic of wanting to protect against pain. We are obsessed with it. I mean, I think there's a statistic that says Americans are like 5% of the world's population, and we consume 80% of the opioids. Like, and it's not a condemnation. It's just to say, like, if we're not careful, it's this distorted realm that we get into where suffering is silenced and we don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to deal with it. We make decisions to get out of it. And it's a pity, it's a shame, because what happens in us, if we can see it, is the most unbelievable transformation. But but we have to go into it like this, open-handed. And it's really hard to do, because especially as leaders, we are in the business of putting out fires. We are in the business of
Yeah.
protecting our companies against pain. We don't want to deal with the reality of it. And so a lot of times we, in our own personal fires, we do the same things.
Mm,
Well, what happens? We miss out. We miss out. And then you still walk around with painful burns that remind you of the time,
mhm,
but there's no healing. There's
mhm,
no redemption. There's no beautiful regrowth. You're just bitter and hardened. And I say
mm,
that's what happens in fire. You can either be hardened or forged,
I
and
love that.
it's one or the other.
Two questions. The pregnancy, the rainbow baby, you said, how hard was that period of time for you
For being pregnant with her,
when you were pregnant with her after your other daughter passed?
yeah, it was so hard.
Yeah.
It was like I couldn't allow myself to believe it was true.
Mm,
And honestly, I don't think I bonded with her as much
mm,
in the womb as I did like with Max and
mhm,
and Emma, um, because I just kept waiting for the other shoe to fall. Even
mhm.
though we
Here.
had
Mhm,
seen God's provision through
mhm,
it, it was still this like innate human protection of like,
mhm.
I can't celebrate. I can't celebrate. I can't, I
Yeah.
can't love her. I can't. And so it took me, a little while, not long after she was born, of course, but like, yeah, pregnancy was
Hard.
hard.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember the really cool thing Dr. Cox and Dr. Little did for us was, hey, Christy, because she wasn't working in labor and delivery at the time. If you ever want to come in and just get an ultrasound, you come in. You pop
Yeah.
in, we'll do just to show you everything is okay. Because
Yeah.
that was a fearful time for both of us after we walked through that. So you're walking through that season. When did God drop a book in your heart? Tell me about that.
He didn't. So it was actually the one thing I always said I do not want to do. I don't want to write a book. But it was about I got back to being a news anchor for two
Mhm,
years after Emma's passing. And, but through my pregnancy, I had heard from countless others who were honestly just drowning in their own
mhm,
loss
mhm,
and pain and grief. And their stories, I didn't really realize it at the time, but really burdened me. And I thought, man, here we have experienced such profound redemption and hope in the midst of this. Like, how can I help give that like to others? And so I started feeling called out of news, and I had spent my whole life building this career, and I was at the place I wanted to stay forever. And so the thought of giving that up was terrifying. But yet I felt this nudge, out, out, out. Finally, I'm driving down the highway one day, and I pray, I say, God, if you are calling me out of news, will you please tell me what you're calling me into? And I'm half expecting him to say, PR or something like that, right? And like that would make sense. But instead, I'm driving, and clear as day vision in my mind's eye of a blackened, burned out forest.
mhm,
And with it came the words controlled burn. And I got really quiet because I knew I was hearing something. And I just allowed him to piece by piece download this concept of life's fires, you know, being either a wildfire raging out of control or bordered by his promises and
mhm,
provision and power. The science behind controlled burns is fascinating.
mhm,
And the same can be said spiritually, that what they
mhm,
can do to rid a landscape, right, of invasive species, what it can do to promote new growth, but it has to be bordered. And so anyway, I come home, and I remember telling my husband, I'm like, sit down. Uh, I had this vision, and I think I'm supposed to leave my job, and more than half of our family's salary. And you know what, Ken? He looked at me dead in the eyes, and without missing a beat, he said, do it. Because we were different.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
you learn to trust,
mhm,
truly trust the voice of God when after you walk through something like that. And we knew, I mean, this is crazy to the world to leave what I left, but he's in it. And so just take me where you want to take me. So I left news and I thought I was going to create curriculum. I said, the only thing I don't want to do is write a book. Well, we know how that goes. So I end up in meetings with publishing execs that I didn't even know about. And they were just like, you need to tell the story. We're sending you a contract. So the rest is history, and Control and Burn is now.
I did tell God one time I had to speak in Evansville, Indiana to a bunch of schools. And I said, God, I'm never moving here. If you tell me to move, I ain't coming. So you don't ever tell God you're not. I did. That's been a long time ago. So I'm not going to, I'm still not going to Evansville, Indiana. I'm like, there's no way I'm coming here. John 14:27. I want to close with this. I love the scripture. Jesus says, my peace I'll leave you. Not the world's peace, but my peace.
Yeah.
Talk about what that, my mantra for 2025 is seek peace. So every time I feel myself get elevated or upset with a contractor or my video guy or somebody, I'm just like, Ken, seek peace.
Yeah.
Talk to our audience about what peace means to you now.
Peace is Jesus. He is the Prince of Peace. And, he says, I think it's in John when he says, this is eternity, that they know you. He's talking to the Father. He says that they know you and they know me, Jesus Christ. And so peace is knowing Jesus. And that is another beautiful thing that happens is we get to, in our pain and suffering, we get to know an intimacy with Jesus who suffered more than we could ever suffer. We get to relate to him in his suffering, and something happens there, Ken. Something happens that changes us when we get to the point where Jesus is, suffering and crucifixion isn't just a story. It's like you're sharing. You are picking up your cross in his suffering, following after him, locking eyes with him on the Via Dolorosa and saying, I know you know. And that is what peace is, because peace is not circumstantial. Like, so often we think it's a feeling, it's an emotion. No, it's knowing Jesus, because everything else is benefit. And I remember somebody saying once that, a lot of times in pain and suffering, people point to eternity as encouragement and hope, and it's real, and it will happen one day. There will be no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering. But that means that this life, this short blink of an eye that we have here, that means this is our chance to relate to Jesus and his suffering. We're not going to have that chance in heaven. We're not going to have it. And so now is our chance. Don't waste it.
I love that. Brooke, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Oh, you can find me on my website, morewithbrookemartin.com, Instagram, Facebook. I'm all over.
Yeah, check her out. And like I said earlier today, Emmy award-winning newscaster from Indianapolis, Indiana, not Dallas, Texas, where our mutual friend Michael Mothan lives.
That's right.
Is why I said that earlier. Brooke, thank you so much for being a part of our show today. I'm super excited to drop this episode, and just the feedback that we'll get from this for people that have walked through difficult times. I have 5 affirmations that I created for myself, one of which that I write down every single day in my planner is I am whole. I choose to use past pain to help others find healing.
Yes.
And sometimes we walk through moments in our life that are very, very hard. Every time now, since I created this affirmation about 4 or 5 years ago, every time I do this affirmation, or every time I walk through a season, and my pastor says, you're either in a crisis, you're coming out of a crisis, or you're about to go in a crisis. Life can be hard.
Yeah.
Is, okay, God, I don't understand why I'm going through this, but I know you're going to use this in the future, in this experience that I have, to be able to help somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of Paul in Philippians when he's in prison and he's writing to the church, and it's so powerful. He says, I rejoice, right? What we were talking about. I rejoice because I know that through your prayers and the work of the Holy Spirit, this will turn out for my deliverance. Yep. As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not at all be ashamed, but that Christ will be honored in my body, whether through life or death. Yeah. What he's saying is what happens in suffering is that we become unashamed and Christ is honored. Hallelujah.
I love that. I love how you reflect the character and nature of God. Thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, thank you for joining us on another episode of As the Leader Grows. I am your host, Ken Jocelyn, listen, I would love to connect with you. We've created a free community with a ton of resources, including our Create Conference, which is actually coming up in Atlanta in about 3 weeks. Myself, my good friend John Maxwell, Gary Brecka, a lot of amazing friends, but we put some free resources on there. Create Conference last year, good friends like Ed Milet, Erwin McManus, and others. Go to growstatdrive.com/free. Check that out. There's a ton of stuff there and an unbelievable community of about 2,500 faith-based entrepreneurs. Thanks. And I'll see you next week on As the Leader Grows. Girl, what a story.
Love it.
What a story. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.